All right. We are live, guys. Welcome. The Comic Book Conservators live show. Welcome to the stream. Glad to have everybody for this very special 28th episode. Wow. We did it, guys. We're here with our special guest, Jerry the Jitterbug. Hey, Jerry, great to have you on the channel. Finally, how are you?
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me. I just want to say Dr. Paul and Phil, and I guess Larry will be here shortly. I really enjoy the show. I really enjoy what you guys do, and it's fun when I watch it. So, talk comics.
We're all huge fans of comics.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're all huge fans of comic books, so we have that in common, so we're friends, right? That's more important than anything else, and not than anything else, but than anything else in our realm. And we're fans of your channel, so we're really happy to have you on. As you mentioned, we are simulcasting with Captain Larry's channel, Flying L Comics.
Oh, nice.
And he should be joining us soon. He's actually in Germany at the moment, so he's suffering from the Wi-Fi problems, so he should be joining us soon. Jason, thank you for the $2 super chat. Adrift has been a welcome addition to both the channel and the Facebook Comic Book Conservators group, and we really appreciate it, Jason. Thank you.
Sure.
So, Phil, how are you?
Howdy. Hey, everyone. As always, coming to you from the Brooklyn Queens line here in New York City, and just drowning in comics as always. So, doing well.
Phil from Phantom Restoration. Link in the description to find Phil, most available on Instagram. And you're not the only Nyaka we have today. We have someone everyone on this channel should know, Jerry the Jitterbug. Welcome, Jerry.
Nice to have you here, Jerry.
So,
glad to
Jerry,
be here. Happy to be here.
You are representing another borough tonight.
Well, actually, it's not a part of New York City. So I live on Long Island, separate.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it's connected to Brooklyn. It's connected to Queens, but it's not a part of Manhattan. So probably about 45 minutes east of Manhattan is where I live.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here.
Empire State Buildings.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Obviously, Jerry the Jitterbug of Jerry the Jitterbug Comic Collector channel here on YouTube. Same handle on Instagram. Links in the description to find him. Again, if somehow you're watching this channel and don't know him, I don't know how could be the case, but just in case, there he is. Before we do shout outs, Jerry, I don't always do this, but sometimes.
Sure.
I have a beer on the stream, and so I like to do this, and I like to just, let's see if we can get a good sound effect. Oh, did that come across well?
Very nice.
I know you like to enjoy one as well. This is a Sam Adams Oktoberfest.
Very
Cheers.
nice.
I really enjoy Guinness. I had a Guinness.
Hey.
Had a Guinness on channel for St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, I love Guinness. It's one of my favorites.
I do. I enjoy. It's odd. I'm not actually a big beer drinker, but funny enough, when I do drink them, I do like those heavy, draft beers. And it's crazy that I'm just thinking, man, it seems like we just started the show, but I had one on camera. I know it was St. Patrick's Day. That's half a year ago. I mean, this is episode 28. We haven't gone every single weekend, so I know it's been over half a year, but wow, does time fly?
Time time does fly. I have so many projects, so many things to do, and I'm like, what is going on? Weeks when you work and you start doing comic work and just life, you're already here on a Friday and then Monday starts again. It's time does fly.
Absolutely.
Do I have an echo? Because I'm looking.
Yeah.
You're a little bit. I don't have an echo for you, but you're a little digitized for me. I don't know if that's true for everybody. Chat, let us know how Jerry sounds.
Let me see.
Richie says Jerry
Wow,
looks
he's
nothing
my-
like I imagined. Oh, Jerry, I'm sorry if I'm talking over you. It's because there is a bit of a digitized thing going on with your mic. Sorry about that.
I hooked it up directly to the web, so maybe
Yeah.
that's the issue.
All right. Well, let's do our shout outs. We got Shop 4 Comics says hello all. Thank you, Shop. Thanks for joining us. Shelby's here, of course, has got my popcorn ready. My man Hugo Danner's here. Mike, good luck in the auctions this week. He's got some art going up with Heritage this week. Dagny's here. Welcome. Peter, the professor, Dr. Paul Shelby, and everyone. I know he's been watching your channel as long as you've had your channel, as have I. Which actually, that's something else I wanted to bring up with you, Jerry. You're only 2 weeks away from your 4th anniversary, I believe.
Incredible.
I believe correct. October 2020 is when I started. Yes.
Crazy.
Congratulations.
Time does fly.
Yeah. Well, for you, it may seem that way, but actually for me, it seems like kind of wild that it hasn't been 4 years yet, because I feel like I've been watching your content for a long time. But it hasn't even been 4 years yet.
Thank you.
And Jason Adrift, as we've already mentioned, he's here with the super sticker. Thank you again. Vulu's here. Pluck my last nerve. Says, hey, Jerry. And again, the professor says, great to see you, Jerry. Ben Stewart says, hello, all. And Richie, as I said, says, Jerry looks nothing like I imagined. Shelby says, glad to finally put a face to your voice, Jerry. Adrift does say we have a slight delay from your mic, Jerry.
Great.
And Adrift also says, oh, maybe I should let you read it. Jerry, I think this is for you to read. I imagine that you do like this with your hands when you say it.
Oh.
Can you see the chat? I highlighted it on the bottom.
What, the Tengojo?
JX P75 says, hey, all.
Really Tengujo. Yes.
We're I was going to save that for later, but Jason just hit us with it right now. JXP75 says, hey, all. Cornelius Scott Shea says, hey, all. Those are new names to me. Thank you. Glad to have you join the channel. And Ben says, thanks for all the great content, Jerry J. And I would like to echo that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we spoke really kind of briefly, Jerry, to plan out this show. We have 2 segments as we normally do. And as we normally do with a guest, we have the origin story, which I really enjoy that we do the origin story of folks when they come on the channel. And so I do appreciate you sharing that with us. And we're going to start that in just a moment. But before we do, I do want to give just a little bit more of a preamble and say, in terms of that, congratulations, to your 4-year anniversary that's coming up. I saw your channel. Obviously, I wasn't watching it from day one, but I must have been watching it within 6 months of you starting. So that would put it about 3 years ago now, I suppose. And I have to say, it changed my perception of what could be done. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I just want to acknowledge it right up front to say I've really enjoyed both what you've done on the channel in terms of trying to educate, but also, and I think this is important to you, the entertainment. So thank you for the entertainment. I've really appreciated it. I've really enjoyed it. And, you know, for those of us that got isolated during the pandemic, it was something that I really looked forward to, especially during that time. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Very nice. The kind words. I appreciate that. And I guess a lot of channels flowed from COVID, and mine did. So I'm glad.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started with that origin story. I have a deck ready to go with a few images to guide us. But do you want to kick us off with that first image, or do you want to just stay talking heads here and get started with like how you were introduced to comics and all that sort of stuff? You let me know.
Sure. Well, growing up like you did in the 70s, it was a really wonderful time if you liked comic books, if you liked superhero characters, because it was just a nice time with the Super Friends that were on Saturday mornings. I used to look forward to watching that every Saturday morning. The Batman reruns that used to be on from 1966, the Incredible Hulk, the Wonder Woman series, the live action Shazam, the Scooby-Doos when Batman and Robin used to guest appear. So, and even if you remember, I think it was in the late 70s. Go ahead, Paul.
You know what I would add to that list is Spider-Man on the Electric Company. Remember that?
100%.
Yeah, that was
when he used
another
to come
one
down
to add
from,
to that
from
list.
the top. It was amazing. So when I was younger, it was Star Wars, it was superheroes. When I could walk, I had Batman toys. So it was always superhero toys. And it was just a great time to grow up, I thought. And
Absolutely.
I got into comic books. And you asked me when we spoke if I can recall the first comic book. And I know which comic book it was. It was a Justice League, probably from 1977 or so, probably 77. And that's why I sent one of the photos to you in relation to SeaWorld. And SeaWorld in the late 70s and early 80s, very early 80s, used to have a water skiing show with the Super Friends and the villains, the Joker, the Penguin, and they used to water ski. And I found a few photos, and I remember my parents, we were driving to Florida in the 70s, late 70s, and we pulled, that's it right there. Yup. And we were going to see that show, and we were also going to Disney. And I recall stopping at a gas station, and I, for the first time, saw a spinner comic rack, the old-fashioned comic racks.
So would this be? This would be like on a road trip down to Florida,
off of I-95, correct, on a road trip. And at that time, I don't even think I was able to read at that time. I was very young, and I remember asking my mother. I wanted to buy these books because it had all the heroes on the cover. And it was the time when the Justice League used to have the faces of the like Batman and Superman around.
On the along the top and left side, or left and right sides.
Yes. And I just remember I remember being a white cover with their faces, and I just remember looking at the photos and the ads, and that was my first comics, a mid to late 70s Justice League. So,
and you were hooked.
And it was dealing with going to see that show. And I remember that show. That was just an amazing experience as a young child going to see that, because it was a fun time. Definitely.
That's awesome. So I actually have a story about this show. It's not my own story, but I got permission to share it. My wife grew up in on the Gold Coast of Florida, not that far away from Orlando. And we talked about this. You're 1 year younger than I am, Jerry, and she's 2 years. So she's 1 year younger than you. She's 2 years younger than me. So we were born 72, 73, 74, the three of us. Her name's Chris, and her maiden name was Waterhouse. She, like us, was a fan of the Wonder Woman TV show. Her mom took her to this. Phil, can you add Captain to the?
Oh yeah.
Her mom, Captain, how are you? He's still getting connected. Her mom took her to this show, and she was very young at the time. And when this pyramid of superheroes went by, she saw Wonder Woman, and she stood up and started screaming, "Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, it's me, Chrissy Cosnick." And her whole family loves to tell that story. So I've heard it many times from them. And so you're not the only one who loved this show.
Yeah. Yes. It was awesome. Hey, Larry.
Larry.
How you doing? It was
Hey.
Glad
Sorry,
to have
guys.
you join us.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was having my internet's really bad. Hopefully I can hang out with you guys until it craps out again.
Wow. Welcome. So we got checked in. We're doing Jerry's origin story here, and he was just telling us about this great water skiing show. And so, Jerry, I found an ad on the back of a comic book for this show, and there was even a coupon. No, it wasn't a back cover. It was interior. There was even a coupon to cut out for like 35 cents off admission. So I found the exact summer that this happened, and I'll share it with you. I'll find it and share it with you.
Oh, I would love that, because I want to look for the book. It was very important. It was a very good time in my young life when this happened. And just to remember about getting that comic book. So since then, I've always been buying comic books here and there through elementary school. I don't have any of those, but I still have my toys from elementary school, as well as from probably going up to like 8th grade, 7th grade. I have my original Star Wars toys. I have the boxes still.
Same.
My mother kept everything. So they're in bad shape. I have them here. I started cleaning them a little bit. But I have the Yoda Dagobah play set. I don't know if you had that one.
I didn't.
I have the box.
I didn't, but we made our own. We actually found a stump that looked a little bit like that cave, and we made our own of that.
Right.
We did a lot of that. We grew up in the country. We were, between my brother and I, we only had, I don't know, probably not even a dozen Star Wars action figures. And that was over the course of all three movies. We for Christmas we would get one or two, right? We got one big playset each. My brother got the Millennium Falcon, and I got Darth Vader's Death's battle cruiser. We didn't have that one, but like I said, we created our own version of it because we would just take them outside and play in the dirt and play in the sand. We recreated all the scenes, just for fun. And I do remember that set. We had some friends that had that set. I have to ask, do you remember Micronauts?
I remember Micronauts.
I do, but I do not have them. And that was the time when Transformers as well was coming out, I think. Yeah. So that had, maybe I was in about 7th grade, so 86, 85, 84, around there. So I stopped playing with toys, like 85, 6 probably, maybe. But I still collected them.
Yeah. Micronauts predated the Star Wars figures by just a few years. We had an older cousin who had them, and I
Right.
only had a few of them, but I loved them. I thought they were such awesome toys, and I have a few of those still as well. So I just wanted to touch base with you on that. I also wanted to say thank you so much to to JSS Brooklyn for the super chat. Says thank you for the interview. Big fan of Jerry's Craft. You guys too. What you guys do matters. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
That's
Knights of
wonderful.
Old says, I have that poster. That's amazing. How would that survive in your back
Wow.
pocket at the side of the lake?
Right.
That's incredible.
Definitely a cool. That's something that I'm gonna look on eBay now and see if they float around once in a while. I'm interested to see. So,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
so that really was my upbringing with the comic books and the superheroes, and then when I got into, I would say, ninth grade, I started to go to local comic book shows, local ones around Long Island, Nassau County. There was a lot in Queens as well. Okay. And I used to start going to them. And that's when I started collecting hardcore. And that's when I got a lot of my books that are in my collection now, the Marvel Keys, the Hulk 181s, the Amazing Spider-Man 129s, and
Wow.
they were very inexpensive, maybe $100 if it was a high grade one. And at that time, I also bought a lot of Golden Age Batmans. Like I had
Wow.
about half of the books from 1 to 10. I think I had 5 going up, and then I had a few other ones as well, 11, 12,
Wow.
and the
nice.
World War II ones, the Mussolini and the Hitler cover one. I had
18.
a lot of them, and it's funny. I found the receipt. That one I bought from Sparkle City. You ever hear of Sparkle City Comics? They were very big in the 90s.
They're still
and 80s.
around.
They're still around. And for my Batman, the World War II one, I have the receipt because everything was by mail and phone back then, and it was a lot of money. I think it was like $200, very high grade.
Wow.
So there was a book in my local library where I went to school, and they had a comic set. It was a comic book, and at the end they had a section called Restoration in it. And I was very intrigued by the restoration section, and they explained how to take the covers off, soak them in chemicals to clean them, use blotting papers after you soak it to remove the dirt. So I remember, and they also had a lot of pages about color touch, how to do it, the right ways, the wrong ways.
What was this book?
I always looked for this book. I
This has been like the
I
90s?
looked for it. In fact, I went. It was probably from the late 80s. And it was a soft round cover book, and it had different chapters. It was something on the lines of how to collect comic books, something like that. So
We'll have to
I
be on the
really
lookout for
enjoyed the
that.
restoration. Yeah, I went to the library. They didn't have it. I looked 25 years later. Have they not have it anymore? So I remember in my basement, and I don't know what chemical I used back then, but I remember it was real noxious. And I took the Batman covers off, and I soaked them in the chemicals, and I used the blotting paper, and I put books on it to flatten them out, and I cleaned them up. So then I wanted to be a comic dealer, and I went to the shows, and I wanted one of those displays with the light, and I set up books. And some guy came in and he says, I want to buy all those Batman comic books. This was a few years later. I think I was in like an 11th grade when this happened. And he goes, I'll give you $1,500 or $1,600. He took out the money. And when you're in high school, you're like, oh boy. And I sold them all to him.
Wow.
And I was so upset.
Yeah.
Like now I'm upset that I did it. And I still see the guy around because he's a dealer. He's an old man now. And he used to have a comic store in Hicksville. Phil, you probably know where Hicksville is on Long Island in Nassau County. And he used to. The guy's a big golden age dealer. He's goes to the local shows, and he taught me a lesson because when I sold him the Batman books, it's when what is that dark? What's that Marvel book that people were specking on from the '90s? Dark something. He's an alien.
Dark Reign.
Darkhawk.
Darkhawk.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Darkhawk. Yeah. So. This is when that Darkhawk #1 came out. I don't know when that came out.
Yeah.
Because I bought like
15
of them at the time. I used to buy the books.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want to buy a few of those books. I go, just take them because you bought all the other books. He's like, no, it's a separate transaction. I paid you.
Yep.
Give something away for free, even if you're dealing with someone in an exchange.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit.
Is this my internet? Because it's spinning out once in a while.
I thought it was my internet.
So yeah, I was really.
We got the gist of it though. Like,
and then at that time, also in Manhattan before New York Comic-Con, they used to have a show at the Penta Hotel.
Oh yeah.
And the Penta Hotel is across the street from Penn Station, and was the building's no longer there now. They knocked the building down about 5 years ago, I think. But I used to go to that show and buy a lot of keys back in the day. So I have a big bulk of my collection when I was younger.
Wow, I'm jealous. I grew up in a very rural part of Michigan, and we just didn't have.
Okay.
I didn't go to a comic book convention until I was an adult. I think I might have had children already when I went to a comic book convention.
Wow.
You know, we just didn't have access to them. My parents both worked. They were not going to take a day off or a weekend from work to drive us to Detroit or anything like that. So that just was not in the cards at all. But so I'm jealous. But one question I have for you, I think everybody remembers how much comic book costs when they started collecting. And for me, it was 50 cents.
Sure.
And it's a matter of fact, my brother and I, well, in Michigan at the time, there was a 10-cent deposit on bottles and cans. And there's a Seinfeld episode about this. But what my brother and I would do is we would actually, in the summer, when we had the summer off, we would head out in the morning from my grandfather's places. My mom would be working, my dad would be working. And we would wander around because even though there was a 10-cent deposit on the bottles and cans, some people would still just chuck them out the window or throw them in a garbage bin or whatever. And you could take them to 7-Eleven. You get a dime for each one. And so we would start off in the morning and we would just wander around. We would wander to different parks. We would go wherever we could, alleyways, wherever. And we would find bottles and cans that people just threw down in the garbage, literally. And we would collect them. And if we could find 10 between the two of us, we could go to the 7-Eleven and turn them in for $1, and then we could turn that $1 into 2 comic books, one for each of us. And we would do that basically every day. We would set off in the morning, and we would just keep wandering until we found 10 bottles or cans, and then we would go to the 7-Eleven. We'd get one comic each, and then we'd go back to my grandfather's and have lunch and read a comic book. And then the next morning, we would do it all over again. So it was 50 cents. How about you, Jerry?
I remember when that 5 cents came out for the cans in New York. It's 5 cents, and I was going to be a millionaire. We used to go around, same thing, collect the cans, go to 7-Eleven, same story. I remember I collected a ton, and this is when A Death in the Family came out. So that would be the price when A Death in the Family, what was that, like 86 maybe when that came out? I think 85 maybe.
That'd be a little later. 75 cents maybe? 75 cent cover price? Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's
like 88 maybe?
Right, so it would be 75 cents.
That's great. Yeah, we have some folks that say Mike says 12 cents for me.
Yeah,
1966, I was 5.
Wow.
12 cents for
Jeez.
me.
I was at $1.75. So
Yeah,
hey,
yeah. Phil's a baby. The comics were $1.75 when he started collecting.
Well,
yeah.
you know, for me, I had an older brother and a mom who also read comics, so I was little, but yeah, I was 12 cents.
I wish, who has a baby face but is a little bit older than us, Jerry, is Shelby of Shelby's Comics, and he was saying the cover price was like 25 cents when
Okay.
he started collecting. And I was like, what? I thought he was younger than I am.
Wow.
But they did. There was a lot of inflation during that time from about 1970 to about 1978, where comics went literally from
Sure.
20 cents to 50 cents in like 5 years, right? After having stayed stable for 50 years almost. So
Yeah.
that was the last time we had a lot of inflation, that period of time that we lived through. But
Right.
that's
I
great.
mean, yeah.
It's tough.
Comics
What else
now
do you want to
like
share?
sucks.
What else do you want to share about your origin story or your first? What were your favorite comics at the time? That it sounds like you got involved in, sort of wider fandom almost immediately with access to the big cons and the dealers and everything.
Yes.
What were your collecting goals when you were at that point?
It was Batman. And pretty much the same as they are now. I stuck with the same goals for 20 something years. It's getting the key comics, the first appearances, and I want to complete the Batman run. That's one of my goals before I leave the Earth. And even if Batman 1 is a page or two or coverless, I'm okay with that.
Sure, yeah.
I want to complete the Wiz run. I want to complete that, Wiz Comics. That I'm pretty close. I have about maybe, I would say 15 or 20 more books to complete the run.
Wow.
That's great.
Right? So, yeah, Wiz I want to complete. And then just getting all the major keys. That's my main goal. In fact, today, everything. I went to an estate sale today, local, and the upload's going to be on tomorrow's upload on my channel. And I got some nice keys today, like really good page first appearances that were from an original owner's collection who passed away. None of them were bag and board, and they were just piled up. And I went the second day, and I wish I went the first day because I really missed a lot. So it's going to be a good upload.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I saw your upload recently with one of your auction sites, like non-eBay, local auction site, with the Batman 181. Right. And I have to say, like, you really know comics, right? So you don't have just superficial knowledge. You have deep knowledge. This has been a passion of yours for a long time. And I was thinking the same thing you were, which is it all just hinges on whether or not your Batman 181 has the centerfold, has the pinup or not.
Yep.
Right? And I'm happy to say, well, maybe we shouldn't spoil it. People should go watch that video and see if he had the centerfold in his Batman 181. I love that book. I love the cover. It's such a great book. But you got to check for the centerfold.
I noticed that my channel, listen, conservation's great. Doing the conservation uploads is fun. But there's only so many times you can show how to wash a page or to leaf cast or to do things.
As a content creator.
And I do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I really, like, the channel gets going when it's those obscure things on my channel, like auctions or comic shows. It seems I get a lot more views than the run-of-the-mill conservation projects, which is fine. I'm enjoying doing it, and that's why I do a lot of I try to be comical. I try to bust chops on my channel, and because I try to intrigue people. It's not just I need to fill a lot of time when I am talking. I mean, when I'm working on the books, because I show real life working. So what is it called? Radio silence or dead silence on the radio. You have to talk and I have to fill stuff in, and that's why I make the Tengojo and everyone who is watching. It is not Tengojo, okay? It's Tengujo, okay? But it's theatrics, okay? With the Big Bertha, how the copy press, and with the bookbinding press. I've been calling it a bookbinding press, and then you said it. I looked it up. It deals with the, what is it? The space between the plates, right?
Between the platen,
the platelets, right? And it's fine, but it's just, these are the things that come to my mind that I have to at least say these things to get things rolling.
It's fun.
If I
it's
just
fun.
about speaking.
Yes, I remember early in your channel somebody commenting on one of your uploads that you talk too much. And I remember for a couple weeks after that, you talking about that comment and saying, what am I supposed to do here? This would be putting people to sleep, just watching me with my vacuum cleaner in the background and just watching me squirt pulp on here. I'm filling the airtime here. And if you don't like it, well, maybe there's a different channel for you. But I think that I have to do something to fill the space. And you're absolutely right, of course, right? One thing about Tengujo that I want to say on the record here, because we did talk about this briefly, and I do enjoy, I call it your samurai voice when you say it. And again, I imagine that you go like this when you say it. But we have to balance, Jerry, people, there's such a paucity of information out there on comic book conservation that we have to balance the entertainment value against what is, whether we like it or not, a bit of a responsibility, because people are watching us and learning, right? And there are plenty of people that are not reading Tengujo. They only know about it from you. And I've had multiple people talk to me and say, well, Tengojo paper. And I say, you mean Tengujo, right? Well, I'm sure it's Tengojo. No, it's Tengujo paper. And it's because the only place they've heard it is your channel. And so this is what you and I briefly touched on and said we would talk about more here. Although, you know, it's your channel and you're entertaining and it's all in fun. Whether we like it or not, we're also kind of role models. And I know there's like, you know, the people who are like, well, I'm not a role model because I choose not to be. But when people are following you, as many people are, I mean, both of our channels have over 4,000 subscribers, right? I feel like I have a bit of an obligation to disseminate the correct information, even if then I'm goofing and, you know, entertaining. And I do very much enjoy the sound effects you do, and a lot of the goofiness I very much enjoy. But sometimes we're teaching the next generation things.
Well, I know what I'm going to do when I do Tengojo next time. Properly pronounced Tengojo. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, Larry literally can't do it. He's got a mental block.
Yeah, I do have I know I have switched to saying Japanese paper.
Yes.
That's my it's a mental, it is a mental block.
It is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it is kind of semantics. It is just like we know what's being talked about. Like that's the most important thing. But it is just a subtlety. But.
You also have to understand that I have a very strong New York accent, and when we speak from New York, we say things a little different sometimes.
Speaking of your current project, which I encourage everybody to check out, is a pre-Robin detective comic with obviously starring Batman. And it's for an individual that I assumed had some kind of disease or something, because you kept saying he was germy. And I was like, what germs does he have? I'm worried about the guy, right? Where I come from, we would say Jeremy, but in your accent, it's Jeremy's book. So
Yeah.
I love it.
Now you're just being hard on him.
If you ever see Long Island, we don't say Long Island, we say Long Island. So it's just the way we speak here. But
yeah,
that's an awesome book that I'm working on.
I recommend
really
everybody check out this series. Yeah, it's great.
Detective Comics 33. So it's, what is it? The fourth or sixth appearance of Batman, right? 3327. He was in every one, I believe.
Yeah.
It's the first appearance of Martha and Thomas Wayne, Joe Chill. It's really a cool book. And I love, do we want to segue into...
This is a great segue, but before we move on from it, did you ever think you would be working on that book when you got started with your channel?
Not when I got started with the channel, but once I'm at a good place with Golden Age books. Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
I love Golden Age books. Silver Age are my least favorite. I don't think I just did that X-Men #1, and listen, I got the conserved grade at 2.5. It was in pieces, the book. They're just so hard to work on, and especially to leaf cast Silver Age books. So you just have to be very careful with them, and especially when you're leaf cast. I don't know if you saw, it was in pieces, the cover.
Oh yeah.
The cover was it was probably in 6 or 7 pieces, and I had to put it together, then I had to leaf cast it, and it's hard, and the paper stinks. It's just not a good book. You can look at it the wrong way, and you can get, you all know, working on Silver.
That's been like a reoccurring theme here. Golden Age books, while older, are built like tanks, so by and large they're really easier to handle and work with than the Silver Age books. And
that's a great segue to one of the next things that we wanted to talk about, Jerry, and that's this project. And this is another place where I'm gonna toot your horn for you a little bit. And I've mentioned this a few times on my channel and on this show, but this project you did, Hulk 181, it changed my thinking. It opened my mind to what was possible. And I wasn't actually familiar with Kenny Sanderson's work before I saw your channel. So your channel was actually kind of my introduction to Kenny Sanderson, who does post quite a bit on Instagram, but doesn't have YouTube. Yes. And so I was not aware of... I knew what leaf casting was. I actually had already made paper. I had already made handmade paper, but before I saw your channel, but I didn't know what was going on in terms of comic books with respect to leaf casting. And this series basically kind of blew my mind. Like I said, it just opened my mind up to what was possible. And once you have those mental barriers broken, and we talked about this briefly, but to me, I'm thinking about leaf casting in comic books right now in terms of something that makes sense to guys our age, the breaking of the 4-minute mile in track. And, we talked about this, but running a human being running a sub 4-minute mile was considered for about a century to be impossible. Scientists said it's not humanly possible for a man to cover a mile in less than 4 minutes. And you had people trying to break a 4-minute mile for literally a century, from the early from actually the late 1800s, and the beginning of the modern Olympics. And then what happened is, I think it was 1964, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. And within a year of him doing that, and don't quote me on the exact stats, but the basic gist of the story goes, within a year of him breaking the 4-minute mile, he was running it in like 3:56 or something. He had shaved another 4 seconds off. Within a year of him doing it, there was another dozen people around the world that ran a sub 4-minute mile. And within about 4 or 5 years of him doing it, there were literally high school seniors breaking the 4-minute mile in the United States. It was completely a mental barrier. And once that barrier was gone, people realized, you know what, if this is achievable, like, you know, maybe not for everybody, maybe you have to have a certain physique, you have to work real hard, etc. But it's achievable. And once people realized what could be done, there were many people that were doing it. And I feel this, we are at that point. We are not that you are Roger Bannister himself, but we are in that transition point right now. So for the last 20 years, as far as I know, there's only been 2 people leaf casting regularly. And that's, of course, Kenny Sanderson and a husband-wife team called the Myers. And there may be others.
Tracy Heft is another one. And there's a few others on that list. But I mean, it's a very small.
Just a handful.
But that's Kenny really was the most known, like, within that.
And that's for the last 20 years, and that number didn't really grow at all, right? And then your channel is, again, less than 4 years old, 3.5 years old since you started doing this. And then in the last 6 months, I think approximately half dozen or a dozen more people have shown us leaf casting in comic books, including some of the folks right here in our chat and on, you know, in this show, of course, Larry included. And I think we're literally at that point where, you know, Roger's broken the 4-minute mile and everybody's realizing this can be done. And not that high schoolers are leaf casting comic books now, but through the internet, in the information age, and people realizing this can be done, it's being done. And not to toot our own horns, but I think the comic book conservation community on Facebook has been a place where people can show off that work, encourage one another, and you know, help one another. And I think we have played a role, in addition, of course, to your channel playing a much larger role, in my opinion, in just disseminating that information and getting people comfortable with it. And I think it's a great time to be a comic book conservator.
Well, you know, Jerry, you know, the same thing. I mean, I stumbled across Jerry's channel, and that was my inspiration. I go, wow, this is pretty cool. This can be done. And that sent me down my path. And again, you know, I didn't know who Kenny Sanderson was. I didn't know who you were. And then there's, you know, I looked at Jerry's channel and I went, I could do that. I want to do that. That's cool. And that's what started me down my path.
Yeah. So you gave us a couple of images here.
I agree.
Ooh.
But this is what you were starting with. So this was actually a 0.5 conserved, I'm sorry, restored, and you cracked it.
Restored, right.
Yep. And these are the images right after you cracked it.
That was my book. I have 2 Hulk 181s, and that was one of my books from high school. Okay.
Oh, nice.
Are you the one who did the restoration?
Yes, on that one.
Nice.
Yes,
Wow.
and I have another one too. I did, and I'll explain after you show the next picture, because it's dulled out. You see all the color touch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a lot of bleed through on that book.
It's what you did back then, and you didn't think twice about it.
No, I didn't.
I'm not sure that I knew that you were the actual restorer here.
Amateur. I am the one who I remember I was in 9th grade sitting outside of my backyard on a table at a patio table, and I had my markers and I took the cover off, and I also
So you put the tape on there too, then? Yeah, right.
Yes, water.
Yeah.
red watercolor,
Incredible.
and I painted all of the reds on the front of the car. It didn't bleed through that much. Some did. So that's why I had to wash it out, because I really wanted to get the conserved grade on this, and I couldn't get rid of the markers fully, but you'll see when you flip it through.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide then. So the original grade was 0.5 restored C2. So I usually ask Phil to interpret the CGC notation for us. So what is C2, Phil?
So it's A, B, C level, denoting A is professional, C is amateur, B is somewhere in the middle. And then it's a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the least and 5 being the most. So in this case, as someone that does this work, it's impressive to get anything. There's a lot of cases where C1, even though it's the smallest amount, it's still at a point where you should leave the book alone because you're going to cause too much damage. So it's just not possible to do it. But in this case, being able to remove everything from the C2 and get it into a conserved folder, despite any technical grade, is an achievement in itself. So.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was absolutely blown away by this result. It changed the way that I think about comic book restoration and conservation. It changed my perception of what was possible. And I still, again, I've credited it many times, but I still doff my cap, Jerry, to this outcome, which just is phenomenal in my opinion. So obviously the book was leaf cast.
I may restore this book.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, but
I'm
now
thinking
I guess
about cracking it out. And
you can understand the argument for that based on eye appeal. Yeah.
And do acrylic paints and reproduce the colors. I'm thinking about doing it. I didn't know doing some.
I didn't I was aware of this book, but I didn't know that you've had this book for so long that you were the one that put the tape and the color touch on it yourself, and you even remember. I mean, that's remarkable. Yeah.
What would be your upside goal with this book, Jerry? If you were to crack it again and put it back in a purple label, what do you think could be achieved?
Presentation. And it's my book, and I have a few projects that I'm going to go full restoration on. One of them is a Brave and the Bold 28. That's going to be in the future.
Nice.
And I have it. I was going to conserve it, but it's in such ratty shape. Even if I leaf casted it, it would look like this. Yeah. So I'm a restorer. I grew up restoring cars, and I restore cars. And I like to make things look very nice if I can. I like it to look original. So I think this may be a project, and I know restoration is taboo, but I may do it. And it's going to be a very good project with the Brave and the Bold, because there is a Bob Hope comic from the same month as the Brave and the Bold. Okay. The Bob Hope comic has the same interior first page.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
It has the same back cover. I have a very high grade Bob Hope, this donor book. I think to take the cover off. I want to wet sand, or with very high, fine sandpaper, the graphics off of the cover of the Bob Hope. And then I am going to glue with conserved methods the Brave and the Bold onto the actual book itself, onto the cover. Sure. Then I'm going to maybe leaf cast to fill it in, to smooth it out, and then I have an artist friend, or I may reproduce, because I'm pretty artistic. I was an art minor, and I was always liked doing art, and I reproduced the graphics with the Brave and the Bold, and I would like to get a professional restored grade. That would be my goal.
Would be incredible. So now that but my question here is specific. So the book was 0.5 restored. It's now 1.5 conserved. I'm presuming that you believe that the bones are now there, that this could be a higher restored grade. Like, I'm just going to say it could be a 3, it could be a 4. Have you thought about it that way? What do you think the potential is if you were to put it back in a restored designation? What do you think is the upside potential? What do you think the ceiling of this book is in a restored grade?
It would depend on how well I can do the reproduction of the graphics. That's how I can answer that question.
Yeah.
And it would all hinge upon whether I can reproduce the graphics, I can get the color right. Remember, it's dot matrix, right? It's all dots when they did
Oh,
it.
yeah. Yeah.
Through a microscope. So when you're doing color touch, you're not doing those little dots, you're filling it in full.
Yeah.
I don't know of a way that you use maybe a fine paint.
It's very
I don't think
tedious.
so.
Yeah, it's very tedious work. I mean, the work we're already doing can be tedious, but color touch.
It's just
Yeah. There were some people doing some of
Right.
that stippling,
I
right?
don't. Correct.
So I
correct.
think this is a good
So-
breaking point before we jump into a few more topics. There's a couple questions I think we can hit real quick here. Jason says, what about Kenny's method of full submersion leaf casting? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And JSS Brooklyn says, why is restoration taboo and conservation not so much, or are both viewed dimly? So I'll address this by saying we normally start the show with a segment called Fair Market Value segment.
Yep.
And we often cover conserved books. We cover conserved books by preference, but we also cover a lot of restored books. And one of the things we're trying to sort of figure out is, what is the fair market value of either a restored or a conserved book? And is it higher in conserved books than it is in restored books? I think it's generally true that both are discounted relative to a universal grade. What we have found is that
Sure.
Restored books generally are discounted more than conserved books, but more than anything, it matters what work has been done. There are certain things that fall under restored grade, like trimmed books, that are always going to be hit with a really big discount to a universal value. And there are some pretty simple little things that will end you in a conserved holder, where in fact we found there's no appreciable difference in the value at all. We've highlighted some books here that have actually sold literally for more than the last universal book, especially if it's a really rare book. And we talk about this all the time, but books with fewer than 50 copies in the CGC census that are important books, if you pass on it as a buyer, when are you going to see another one? So sometimes people will pay for a restored or conserved book what they would pay or exceeding the last price paid for a universal book in that grade. So there's still a lot of volatility in pricing of restored and conserved books. I think generally speaking, people do not like restored books, and the market reflects that. Conserved books are not discounted generally as much as restored books. And another thing I guess I should mention is that it depends on how rare a book is. If there's a lot of copies of a book out there, the market for a restored copy is very, very slim. Like, let's just say ASM 300. It's a desirable book, but there's so many of them out there. Buyers, potential buyers of that book, even budget buyers, they would just rather go with a low-grade copy that's universal than a restored copy. So a restored copy of that book, the demand is so low that there's a huge, huge discount to universal grade for that. On the other hand, again, some of these Golden Age books, we see the census population of restored copies approaches that of universal copies. So there might only be 40 or 50 copies universal. There's 30 or 40 copies in restored.
Yeah.
Those copies are going to go for a basically not nearly as much of a discount. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that. We do have a lot of show to get to, but
Sure.
Yeah.
The only reason why I would, well, go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, finish up. Feel free.
I'm just saying the reason why I would want to restore these books is they're mine.
Yeah.
And I just want to know the challenge. I just want to see if I can do it. That's all.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we regularly highlight restored books, even though this is the comic conservation show. We regularly highlight restored books and what they sell for. It's often in the context of, could we do a restoration removal? Is there equity here if we did that, right? But we talk about them quite frequently. So this is where we're gonna get fun. Gloves are off. We're gonna talk about a few things that are potentially contentious here. Comic book conservation, is it science or art? So Jerry, I will quote you. You can correct me, but Jerry had a series of videos not that long ago where he referenced our Facebook group, and he dedicated a series of videos, and he said, basically, I see people asking whether they should measure this out, measure that out, what percentage of this should they use, etc. And he basically said, hogwash. It's art. It's not science. If you're measuring it, you're doing it wrong. Do I have that correct, Jerry, or am I paraphrasing too much?
No, I don't know if I said you're doing it wrong, but what I am saying is that for me, I'm not measuring things. I'm loosely measuring things, okay? Yeah. So a tablespoon, things like that. So you want to measure things, that's great. That's fine. I have no issue. Time period, soaking things, okay?
Yeah.
When I soak things sometimes, I forget I'm soaking it sometimes. So it's not, I don't have a time. And it turns out fine, okay? Yep. If it's Silver Age cover, maybe that's a little different, okay?
Yep. Yeah.
So I'm loosey-goosey with things like this, and I'm all for the science. I get it. I understand it. I have no problem with it, okay? But there's not many things that are done with what we do. We deacidify documents, right? Calcium hydroxide. You want to use calcium carbonate, okay? You can use both, right? It's also.
Do you want me to address that? Was that a right for me to comment on? No, I will say yes. Technically, that's true.
Correct.
Calcium hydroxide does have a much higher solubility, and so you're less likely to get cloudiness with calcium hydroxide. Either one, you could theoretically damage a book with. I don't think the contention that one is less harsh than the other is correct, because you can pH a solution with either one to the same pH, and then really at the end of the day, what the paper's reacting to is the pH of the solution. And so this is where measuring would be useful, because I could make a calcium hydroxide solution that is less harsh than your calcium carbonate solution if I pH it, right? And I measure the amount of chemical that I'm adding, which is what we recommend on this channel. But fundamentally, I don't think there's a lot of room between our positions on this. I think personally, it's both. It's both science and art. And
Agreed.
And where and I will say this too. I think although you're being a little glib about the art part, you've done your homework. I know, because I'm watching your channel, and I know you've gone out and you've read how people do this. You've studied how actual paper scientists do this, and so there's an element here of science that must be observed but it's a minimal level, I think is your attitude. And then after that, it's art.
Sure.
Is that fair?
100%. But let's agree with this: the deacidification and the chemical aspect of working on the books, I'll put my science hat for that 100%. That's the science side of it, okay? Agreed. I can't dispute that. The art side, when I say art, I am more leaning towards the leaf casting process, okay?
Yeah.
That is the art. Because just because you can leaf cast doesn't mean you do it well. Okay?
Correct.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Absolutely correct.
not everyone can do it. And that's where the art comes, because when you are putting the pulp on, it's not just la-di-da putting pulp and I leaf casted. No. There is an artistic way of blending it with the grain, at least the way I do it. Okay.
Sure.
Because when I leaf cast a page, I learned how to do it by studying Kenny Sanderson's posts. And I'm very happy that I'm a good friend with Kenny. We speak, we send text messages, we talk leaf casting.
Yeah,
That's what
Kenny's been a great mentor to all of us, right?
Yeah, all of us. Yeah.
All four of us are thankful to our friendship with him, and he communicates with all of us, and we're very appreciative.
Right, and he's a great guy. But the leaf casting, number one, I think the most important thing if you want to do leaf casting correctly is getting the color to match as close as possible to the existing wrap, because you have to make it look aesthetically looking, where you look at it and it blends, it flows. Okay, and that's a reason why. And I guess, I don't know, we're going to go to the next segment with dealing with what type of papers and bleach and all that stuff, because I'll speak about that if we want to.
Yeah, well, let me react to that, because I think we have a genuine disagreement here. I would say, and this is like, I'm not 100% sure there's a right answer. This might be the difference between a Ford guy and a Chevy guy. By the way, Jerry and I are both GM guys. We're both car guys, and we're both kind of GM guys, right? We both have a history of Corvette restoration and ownership and enthusiasm. But, I don't think people that are into Mustangs because I'm into Camaros are wrong. I think it's a preference thing, right? And here's where I would say I think we have a genuine disagreement. For me, what's more important than the aesthetic match of the paper is strong bonds and longevity and permanence of the leaf casted paper. So for me personally, if you were to say, okay, Paul, here's your choice. You can have paper that matches perfectly, and it's going to last for 20 or 30 years. And it'll have more or less the correct chemistry, but not for centuries maybe, but long enough that you'll be dead before it matters. But it's going to be a perfect color match. Or, and it'll be strong enough. Let me say that it'll be strong enough that someone could flip through the book, right? Or that's choice one. Choice two is it's not a perfect color match. In fact, it's not even close, really, frankly. But the paper that you've created is by a recipe that we know will last literally millennia, not even centuries, millennia. And it's stable. And by the way, it's literally stronger than the paper that you started with. So the rest of the book will fail around it before it fails. And if you gave me that choice, me personally, I would choose category 2, not category 1. And it sounds like you're making the argument that category 1 is the most important and the one that you would choose.
Well, you just described the Mustang. So that's good. Okay, that's fine. You want the Mustang. Because to me, it's flawed, the logic, because you're talking, and I'm not saying you're wrong.
No,
But
no,
you're
I
ta-
love it. It's a great carry of the analogy. I'm laughing at you.
you just
We
said
can't help ourselves but make fun of Mustang people, Ford guys.
but you're saying that the leaf casted portion, meaning the paper, is going to outlast the actual book itself. To me, that makes no sense.
I would
And
agree with that. Part of my process is I want to take the original paper and treat it so
Mhm.
that it's going to last centuries or millennia now. Whereas if we don't do that, it won't. It will be gone, right?
yeah, listen, it's a different opinion. And
Yeah.
if a professional doing it for someone, you have to have a presentation when you thumb through this book.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're getting a conserved book, an individual, and believe me, I can show you, I can crack my early leaf casted books that I did. And I was looking at pictures in preparation. This maybe a Captain Marvel Adventures I did a couple of years ago, 3 years ago or so. And the pulp was such a different color.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't match it. I didn't focus on it. Right. I tried to, but I wasn't good at it. That was an issue. And it just didn't look right. And then also the line work. When you do the leaf casting, it's very important, and I call it line work. When you lay the pulp, it should be a nice straight, or as straight as you can make it, so you feather it in. And let's step back. A lot of my leaf casting techniques and working on these books are harken back when I do body work, okay, on
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah.
So if you're adding Bondo, let's call it Bondo, okay, onto a car, you need, or spackling, that's another example. I like to do home improvement. If you're spackling a seam when you're doing sheetrock work, you have to feather the compound into the sheetrock, or you have to feather the Bondo into the car so it flows in. And I'm doing it on a micro level with the paper pulp when I put it on.
Yeah.
So again, I have no issue with using, and I guess we're going to go into the paper pulp if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Now, I
Yeah.
have no issue going into it because I've tried using mulberry paper, the high end papers. I tried using them before in the past, and it just didn't work well for me. It didn't work well. And then Kenny did a post saying what he uses is print.
Yeah,
And
so let's move on to that part of the so just to wrap this up. I would say these are both valid views, and I think again this is something that should be a balance. I would make the argument that when you talk about the spackling, and if we were to say what was most important, for me I would say the most important thing is that the spackling stays in the crack, holds it together, and outlasts, the rest of the room. And I personally would say it's secondary that it's feathered out perfectly.
Same analogy you're using.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is,
no,
as long as it's in the crack good enough, the feathering out is the most important thing.
Not at all. That is completely not what I'm saying. That's complete opposite of what I'm saying.
I'll give you a chance to.
By you saying that, sure. What it's saying is that I don't care about when I do leaf casting, my leaf casting sticks very well and it stays. And the bonding of the leaf casting that I use, and when we talk about leaf casting further, another thing that helps with the bonding, you have to get a press. You need to get a book binding / copy / Big Bertha, because that is a key essential element to the leaf casting, right? So whatever paper pulp you're using, you can use the high end natural paper pulp, whatever you want to use, right? And you can leaf cast it, and you can put it between two pieces of glass. Believe me, I know from experience. You can put weights on it, the bonding is not going to be like if you use something like this. Okay.
Right. I think this was honestly when I saw your channel early on, and I've been studying the leaf casting and paper making, literature for a long time. One of the things that I thought was a shortcoming of your work early on was I was thinking to myself, the guy's just not using enough pressure. He really isn't to get the right kind of paper bond formation. And for me, I think stepping up to Big Bertha and having that extra pressure, I think was a big step up in your game. Did you perceive it that way as well? Sounds like you are.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. That is a game changer.
Yeah.
And anyone who's watching this and wants to do leaf casting, you need to get one of these. And,
Yeah.
and I know Peter Alici, he bought one from Amazon, and I saw it, and that can work. That's fine. It's the same.
That's a good one. Yeah. It's inexpensive. I have one as well. For those that are interested, I have an Amazon affiliate link for that same press in any of my conservation videos, not in this video, but it's about $80 shipped, and you can generate these kinds of pressures, and it's absolutely required step for handmade paper and for leaf casting. So yeah, we agree on this for sure.
Another important thing when you're doing the leaf casting is the blotting. And I show it, you need to blot it, and you need to look at the leaf casted product when you're done. And I use a spoon, I use a rolling pin, and you want to try to remove the moisture. And then you want to make it enough, and everyone uses Hollytex here. You know when you can lift the Hollytex off. Well, it's a little different with the leaf casting because there's a certain time when you can lift the Hollytex off, and the paper pulp will stay where it is. If you do it too soon, you'll lift the paper pulp off. So once you can lift that, you can look. And a lot of it, even when I don't do the full submersion, I have in the past.
We've seen it.
But I
like
it
on your channel, yeah.
I think it's more controlled. I may go back to doing it because I made a table to do it that way.
Sure.
But you have to look at it, and I think in my last upload I added paper pulp in parts that were thin or parts that I missed, and then you do it all when it's wet. So that's the art work that I'm referring to. Looking at it, seeing your painting, you need a little bit more paint in the painting. I look at the pulp as my paint. So this is an essential thing if you want. And I paid under $100. I got a good deal for that. I found it on where I find them. In Connecticut, I drove and I picked that up.
Yeah,
I'm still shopping for one. I can't find one that's big enough for what I want to do.
It's beautiful.
So they're all small.
These. Yeah, I love these presses. And any of them, the copy presses, the nipping presses, any of these presses from this era are beautiful. And for the uninitiated, so this is necessary to squeeze the water out of the pulp and to set the paper fibers so that you do get a strong bond, and it's done under extreme pressure. And then the drying typically is done under less pressure, right, Jerry? And this is what you're talking about, the drying as well.
It depends on the era of book.
Okay. So you would use the same pressure for the drying period as well, some of the time at least?
For Golden Age, I would, not the Silver Age.
Okay.
I
typically dry under less pressure. Yeah.
A little bit less.
Most of what I do, I'm I learn really well from reading and assimilating. This is why I set out about 3 years ago to just become, I don't know if I'd go so far as say a master. My eventual goal is to be a master of the literature, the peer-reviewed literature on this subject. I would say right now I have a good familiarity, of the breadth and depth of the literature on this subject of leaf casting for, conservation. And so my learning has been from reading primarily and experimenting a little bit. You've been more empirical and more hands-on in your learning. One of the approaches that I've taken is leaf casting is basically just a subset of paper making. It's handmade paper in a very specific way. So just like, if you want to be really great at something, you go back to the fundamentals, right? And so for me, the fundamentals of leaf casting are the fundamentals of paper making. So it's pulp preparation, and it's, how is paper made? Paper generally, once it's laid, is put under extreme pressure for at most a day, and then it's usually dried under less pressure. That's this sort of norm in handmade paper. And so that's typically my approach in leaf casting as well.
Well, what I do after, when it's still damp and it's sort of on the verge of drying, but you can handle it, I take the Polytex off and I put the document between two of my plastic sheets.
The plexi, so that you get that really smooth surface. Actually, that's a great segue to this, probably to this comment as well. That we wanted to kind of touch on.
Sure. So this is just a post that Kenny did, and this is the turning point for me when I used to use the high-end papers and try to use the mulberries, and it just didn't blend well.
The fibers,
and then I'm like, shoot, he's just using the new newsprint. And then I started using it. But before I used new newsprint, I did a Fawcett book. It was a Captain Marvel or a Whiz.
I remember.
I ordered one of these romance books, sweetheart books from Fawcett's at the same era. I wanted to use vintage pulp, and I cut the perimeter of the book, and I made the pulp. It was a disaster.
Somebody in this channel also did that.
Right.
We'll call it an experiment.
You can't.
That way, it's not a disaster. If you learn something from it, it's not a disaster.
Well, I had to do it over. Okay. And so this is another segue with using the newsprint. Today's newsprint, the one that I use, is not the newsprint back from the 40s.
Of yore. Okay? Right.
Correct. And today's newsprint is the one that the papers that I use are mass-produced papers. Some are acid-free that I use, but they're generally big art supply house stores that I get my papers, my newsprint, and I like to use various colors, the white, the tan, all from art supply stores. Okay. And mass produced probably from materials. A lot of them are from Canada. Okay. And then
that's the only place they have trees left.
Right. So it just works out a lot better because I'm better able to create the colors that I want to match up to the existing paper.
So this is another great sort of contrast to point out here in terms of the approach and maybe the values. Again, not that necessarily Camaros are better than Mustangs, although they are, but people, I don't think people that like Mustangs are wrong. But if you learn from the paper conservation literature, what you will learn is they do not, as a matter of fact, I can point to some references where they actually point out all the reasons not to do this. So what do they do? So the general idea is, and we talked about this when we had the professor on, replace like with like. So what does that mean? If you have a document that's 1,000 years old and it was made on cotton rag paper, then you should replace any missing parts in your conservation with cotton rag paper. If you have a document that was made with linen, then it should be replaced with linen. With hemp, it should be replaced with hemp, etc. Right? Now, in conservation, they're mostly dealing with these fibers from centuries ago. Not a lot of lignin in those fibers. Lignin came along really after the Civil War, 1860 through 1880 is when it started to pick up steam. And lignin is present in our newsprint. Why? Because around this time, they started just taking a tree and just grinding up a tree and treating it with chemicals and taking the materials that are available when you grind up a tree and making paper from it. Prior to that, that's not how paper was made. Trees have lignin, hemp, linen, cotton fiber. These things, they don't have any appreciable lignin. Lignin is dark, which is why generally newsprint is darker. Lignin is acidic, and lignin breaks down over time. Lignin, the presence of lignin is essentially why newsprint has a lifespan estimated to be about 50 years. Newsprint is expected under sort of normal storage conditions to disintegrate after about 50 years. And that's why some of these comic books are brown and brittle and falling apart. Now, that doesn't mean under exceptional storage conditions, you can't get newsprint to last longer. Obviously, you can. But for example, and we talked about this on the channel recently, I have a newspaper from Boston from 1817, and it looks better than, I also have, I have the paper from 1970 when Nixon resigned. And if you look at those two papers, the paper from Boston from 1817 actually looks better because it's made of cotton rag, right? Yeah, and the newsprint from 1970 is already browning and going off. So one of the things that I've contended here is that while the sort of rule of thumb, replace like with like, is valid for a document like the Magna Carta, I'm not sure that it's valid for comic books, because I'm not sure that I want to replace the lignin containing paper pulp with more lignin containing paper pulp. And another of the references or analogies that I've used, Jerry, is, and you'll get this immediately, and this will be a great question for you. If you're doing a restoration of a C2, right? You've got a mid-year, you got a 65 vet or 67 vet, and you've restored it beautifully, and you're going to do the paint. Are you going to use the original lacquer paint and deal with all of the maintenance and all of the issues with that lacquer paint? Or are you going to paint it with modern paints, two-stage paints? Almost nobody can tell the difference. Well, and it's the maintenance is easier and everything is better.
For my 69, where I'm getting ready to do the paint job, I was thinking about maybe using lacquer paints.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
And you're using newsprint for your comics. So he's consistent.
And I also show the bonding strips too from the factory.
Right.
You know what I'm talking
NCRS
about?
style.
I want to see the way it was from the factory. And the guy who's going to help me with the body, she goes, "You're effing crazy." He says,
"Yeah.
Listen, when I did my Corvette, it took me so long to do it because I researched what every finish of each bolt was on the steering knuckle. Was it black?
Sure. Cadmium, yeah, because GM they had cadmium plating, nickel plating, chrome plating. They had no plating. They had a black acid type. There was like all these different, yeah.
As a former paint shop owner, I got to go with the two-stage. Sorry, guys.
Don't apologize to me. I'm with you.
It's far superior. 100%. It's far superior. 100%.
So my approach to comic books is the same. And I want to add one other thing, a very strong opinion in the paper, almost not even an opinion. It's just accepted as the correct way to do things. And I'll give a bit of rationale. I apologize, everybody, if this is getting pedantic, but when you look at how how paper conservators conserve these documents, so when I said, okay, replace like with like, and so if I have a cotton rag document, I replace it with cotton rag. That doesn't mean find cotton rag from that era and grind it up and put it in there. What it means is get fresh cotton. So start with the actual fiber itself, right? And this is why, for example, the professor has been making his leaf casting with abaca, right? He's not starting with paper that he tears up and puts in a blender. He's starting with the actual fibers. And that's what's done.
Sure.
I would go so far as to say universally among paper scientists who are conservators, museum curators, et cetera, the people, again, that I'm learning from. And again, we just talked about this contrast, right? So I'm studying the literature, and the rationale there is that when you make paper, even if you said, I'm going to stick like with like, newsprint with newsprint, when you make the paper, there are a bunch of things that happen during the paper making process. So for example, sizing is added, colandering is happening, other processes. Yeah, other clay is added, right?
Chlorine and bleach is added
exactly, right?
that I'm using.
So all those things have happened, and the point is that fiber is now no longer the same as the fiber that was used to make the paper. It's been changed during that process. To use the car analogy, if you're going to repair a fiberglass, bonding strip in your car, you're not going to take an old Corvette body and grind it up and take those fibers to fill that in. You're going to get new fiberglass mat. And so the argument here is that you would go back to the original fiber rather than ripping up a piece of the paper.
100%. But newsprint of today is not the newsprint, like we said, from the 40s and 30s and 50s.
Right.
So it's a step up. It's a different. And all I have to say is I respect Kenny Sanderson as the top guy who does this with comic books.
Yep.
And if Kenny uses newsprint, I use newsprint. And I see what you are talking about. I know what you're talking about. Believe me, I cannot tell you the hours that I read regarding conserving documents from the Renaissance. Remember, calcium hydroxide, I was the first one on YouTube to use that to deacidify a comic book.
Sure.
Where do you got that from?
I know where you got it from, yeah.
So I get it 100%. Okay. And I understand what you're saying. And if you look and if you go on YouTube, there's a lot of the museums that have YouTube pages and YouTube channels.
Oh, yeah.
And they show and they have the shelving unit with all the different, not the pulps, the raw materials.
The actual fibers, right.
Yes. And they weigh them out, just like what the professor, Mr. Peter's doing. They weigh it out. They try to do the mathematical equation to fill in this section. I get that. And I love it. And I think it's wonderful that everyone who is in the conserved world outside of comic books does it that way.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with it. It's wonderful. It's great. Okay. But just it works for me and for the best leaf cast there is that works on comic books, Kenny Sanderson. And the proof is right there on this actual thing. And that's just the way I do it. And that's it.
Yeah.
And
it's just two different approaches.
The next topic to talk about. Sure.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll go ahead and I'll say something. Maybe it'll be my turn to say something controversial here. I think it is two different approaches. Again, I don't think one is correct and one is wrong. My approach, again, because I'm a scientist, because I trained in science, because I learned from sort of devouring literature, that sort of thing. This is appealing to me, this approach of using the original fibers. And so, the professor and I have been collaborating on mastering this literature and studying ways of making paper this way. And consequently, leaf casting. I will say this about this post and about your assertion that you're following Kenny here, with all due respect to Kenny. And of course, we're all friends with him, and I do have the utmost respect for him. It is a logical fallacy. It's known as the argument from authority, to say the best person does it this way, so that's the correct way to do it, right?
Not the correct way, the way I want to do it.
Yeah, fair enough. No, and I'm not saying you are practicing a logical fallacy. I'm just pointing out that it is a logical fallacy. And so for me, if the best technology today or the best person in the world doing this today says this is the way I do it, or even if they say this is the best way to do it, I see that not as the last word, but as the first word. That's the place to start. It makes sense to start with the guy who knows the most, but it does not, to me, make sense to finish with that, right? And that's why
100%.
Yeah, that's why we are sort of exploring this space. That's why we are devouring that literature. And that's why we're experimenting, frankly, with these original pulps. And we may be wasting our time. That's okay with me. It is also true that when somebody is very good at something, it is unlikely that you're going to improve their process. You might try 40 different things and all of them fail. That said, if that process is already very good, and if you come up with one improvement on it, you've done a huge service to that hobby or community or that science. So that's where I'm operating, and that's what I find really exciting about this hobby, is being in that space of saying, yes, he is the best we recognize. He does do it this way. But there's some really smart people who say that you ought to be doing it differently. And can we find a way to take what is accepted by most or many or everyone as the best, improve upon it? And that's what's exciting to me.
The question I have, though, and I understand what you're saying, but you're talking about leaf casting outside of leaf casting on comic books.
I am. Yeah, generally. Like in terms of the literature, I found one reference to somebody talking about newsprint, but by and large, none of the literature is on newsprint. You're absolutely right.
Sure. Right. So we're dealing with ancient documents. We're dealing with
mostly, yeah.
Mostly. No, I agree with you. Listen, I'll tell you right now, every time I leaf cast something, know what I learned? Something.
Yeah,
and
yeah, absolutely.
It's not it's not. I don't want people to think that there's one way and there's only one way. Absolutely not. And
yeah, of course not. I mean, to your point, and actually to your credit, I want to go on record here. You're experimenting constantly. You're changing things all the time, trying new techniques and sharing with us. One of the things I love is, I think a lot of people don't like pretension and don't like people trying to pretend there's something they're not. I want to say, for me, you've never done that, right? You've always said, this is who I am. This is what I'm trying. I'm not a scientist. This is what I think. This is an idea I had. And by the way, I'm probably going to screw some of this up, but I'm going to take you along for the ride, and I hope you find it entertaining. And I love that.
Yeah. No, I screwed up many books.
Well, we all have.
Like
Here, I'll drink to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I have to be honest, there were some uploads I did, and I just lost interest in continuing it because I didn't like the way it was going, or it happens.
Sometimes you got to walk away. Yeah.
We could agree. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with paper. It's fragile. It's not strong, and we're dealing with old paper, right?
Yeah.
And listen, it's not easy sometimes, and it can be one little mistake that you do, removing tape or something. It's not an easy task, but you get better at it the more you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another aspect we wanted to touch on, and that is the bleach. And I think you knew that this was controversial. Obviously, that's why we have this thumbnail from you. And I wanted to talk about it. So I'll give you the first word, and I'll give you the last word too, but go ahead.
Well, you asked me a question. What is it? Can bleach be rinsed from pulp?
Yeah, so actually, yeah,
Well,
I'll phrase it. Yeah, so when I watch your video,
no,
and
I
this
can
is a
answer it.
common theme. Yeah, go ahead.
The bleach, the liquid that I put in to my mixing vessel is rinsed out. The actual liquid bleach. I understand that bleach may affect the molecular level of the pulp of the paper. That's not going to be rinsed out. But I did read literature. You can maybe, but no. Generally speaking, okay. But the liquid itself that I pour in, that I'm rinsing out
Sure.
because I rinse it out probably about 5 or 6 times. There's no smell of bleach.
Right.
We all know what bleach is. But I do understand that it affects the molecular structure of the paper pulp. Okay, that you're not going to change. But then I do think about these things before I do them.
I know you do.
The paper,
Absolutely, yeah.
it goes back to the paper that I'm using. Okay, the paper that I'm using. Well, let's step back. If I was Peter, let's do another shout out to Peter.
The
and
professor.
he's using what Abacus, all of those, right? Hit the paper that he's using. I wouldn't recommend to be introducing bleach into that process.
Right.
Okay, because it's a pure paper or pulp that he's making. Okay.
Yeah, fiber.
But the right, the fibers. But the paper
Primary fiber.
that I am using, this is box store paper. This is mass produced paper. This is paper, and I read about it. The paper industry, they use bleach, liquid chlorine when they're using the wood pulps. Part of the manufacturing.
It's already been bleached, right? Sure.
So they are. In fact, in Canada, there's a big thing that I read that the government's going after the paper manufacturers because of the environmental effects of using the chlorine and the bleach. But we're not talking about in Jerry the Jitterbug's lair in his little boiler room pouring a
They're
little.
coming after you next, Jerry.
You know, how much bleach do you think these paper companies use to make this bleach? It's like a magnitude scope that they're probably using tons of bleach. So that's the issue. So my philosophy is that I'm using the light paper that's been bleached, and I understand what happens to the molecular structure and all of that stuff. So me getting the color that I want for putting the bleach in for 10 seconds and then I rinse it out, I'm okay with doing it because the paper has already been bleached from the factory. That's my philosophy on the subject.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that?
So we agree on a bunch of stuff. Often, most of the time, when we're making newsprint, we're grinding up trees, and at some point the material, the cellulose and hemicellulose and lignin are the three main components that we're getting from the ground up tree. Those are being bleached. Typically, the bleach is being conjugated, and then is the chlor groups are being removed in a later step, typically in an alkaline bath. And those chlor groups being removed is important. So it's been bleached, meaning literally that it's just been whitened or lightened. And then the chlor groups are not left behind because they're removed in the lignin. Actually, this is one of the main ways they remove some of the lignin. So by chlorinating the lignin, then they can later come with an alkaline bath and remove it. So agree that that's what's happening. One of my concerns is in Jerry the Jitterbug's lair, those chlor groups are left behind in the pulp. And that while you may have strong paper today, and you may even have strong paper a year from now, I'm not confident that those chlor groups are not degrading the paper 20 years from now. And that is why I personally would not use chlorine bleach, especially when there are other bleaches that are available to us that we know are safe and that don't have a chlor group to leave, like, for example, hydrogen peroxide as an example. So that's where I'm at on it.
That too. I screwed many books using that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
What? But sure, but at the pulp level, you could use hydrogen peroxide, and it would be gone. Right? There's no way. There's no group there like a chlor group to hide in the pulp.
Sure.
To bite you later. So that's my opinion.
That's the same thing.
Have I made paper and tested it 20 years later? No. Right. This is, I want to be clear. This is a theoretical opinion based on my understanding of the chemistry and the literature. So by no means am I calling Jerry out. I'm pointing out here a value judgment in the preparation where we differ, at least for the moment. I may change my mind. You may change your mind.
In 20 years, we'll crack one of these.
We'll crack a couple of these, and we'll crack a couple of cases together.
And the same thing can be said about the chloramine T, use of chloramine T, where that was a very big additive. And I've used it before, chloramine T. It works very well. It does. It widens the pages very well. Talus sells it,
right? And Talus, we like, okay, they're the supplier to conservators. You would think they're only selling archival stuff that's safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And this was used, the study of the literature that I read in the 90s, right? The 90s and the 80s and the 70s, say 80s and 90s, chloramine T was the chemical that was used. And now you have a lot of literature. It's very hard to wash out. Once it's in, you can't get rid of it.
The chlor group bonds.
I have to say, when I use it, there's a smell, and you can smell that chloramine T. Yeah. If you rinse it out a lot, you will still smell it. It is.
So you've stopped using it.
Yeah.
Officially. So I actually did a video on the channel because I knew you were using it. Some others use it. And it is 100% no longer considered the correct thing to do in paper conservation. As you say, it was fairly widely used. Yeah. And there were about 3 or 4, maybe a few more than that, papers published in, as you say, before the turn of this last century. And the paper conservationists got the message and said, okay, great. It looks fine. It looks fine for 2 years. It looks fine for 5 or 10 years, but it's literally destroying the paper long term, and it's verboten now. Nobody uses it in paper conservation anymore. It is considered to be the wrong thing to do. And I put a video on my channel talking about why I don't use it. And I want to be clear. That doesn't mean I was calling you out or calling anyone out. These are people's comic books. They belong to the people that own them. Do whatever you want to your comic book. When I put something out on my channel, I'm saying this is why I don't do it. Here's what I understand from the literature. And by the way, I'm also happy to be wrong. Like if somebody has a paper that they find that contradicts that, please bring it to my attention, because that's when I can learn, right? So
there's a good paper. It's that, what is that wiki? The wiki of the conservation website. I forgot them. And it's to bleach or not to bleach, and it's a very good article. It's right. It's probably about 15 pages long, and I forgot the author who wrote it, but I think it's a woman. She goes over.
They're almost all. Yeah. The paper conservation literature is almost all female authors, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Every form of bleaching, of lightening, and it's a really. I'm going to put it up on my Instagram, maybe, or on my channel. You should really read it because it just explains everything. And with chloramine T, she does say that it fell out of favor and it's not used anymore. So I agree with that. But I do have a book. I may use it in a couple of weeks on this.
Well, and for those that want to learn more about it.
Right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Way back. Way back I used to. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
For
haven't
those that want
used
to
it
learn
in
more,
But what
5
is-
years. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a video
Right.
on it on my channel,
Listen,
and in the description, I list like the 4 or 5 references that were really damning for chloramine T and why it's no longer used in conservation. But I think we
Right.
should wrap it up there. We've been going almost 2 hours,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate having you here, Jerry. This has been a blast. I
Yes,
think
thank you.
we're all fans, and it was great,
We are.
to have you here and to be able to have fun and hash some of these things out, but really to have no topic off limits, to be able to talk where we agree, where we disagree. And I want to be clear with everybody. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but we agree on 95 or 98% or maybe 99+% of things. We have a love of comic books. We have a reverence for comic books. We want to cherish them. We think that they're treasures, and we want to preserve them for future generations. That's what's most important. And I love you for that. And I really appreciate you coming on the channel. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. Thank you.
We may have focused on the 1 or 2% of things we might disagree on, but even in there, I think we found a lot of common ground. And it's just,
Sure.
it's literally just, my favorite color is green and yours might be red. That doesn't mean one is right or wrong most of the time, although green is superior.
And just to let you know,
No,
my
blue.
2 Corvettes, the 1969 is Fathom Green, and my 1979 is the British, the dark green, both green.
The British Racing Green, yeah. Oh, I think they named it after No, the name is actually it's the racetrack in Great Britain is what that green is named for, actually. But I didn't know that.
For the Corvette, they're both.
Yeah.
They're
So
both
you saw
green,
my
the dark
73.
green, the metallic green, yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You saw my 73 is Elkhart Green.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the
Yes.
official Chevy
They're
color.
very similar. They changed the names, but they look very close. So
Well, next time
agree.
you come
Listen,
on,
guys.
we'll do a segment on our Corvettes.
Okay.
Awesome.
And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for letting me come on the show. I had a great time. Listen, disagreements are the best.
Thanks for being here, Jerry.
Yeah.
I wish politics was more like this today, where you can have a disagreement and still have a conversation about it and not get all angry. Believe me, this is something that I do for a living, and you talk about it and you can have a different opinion, and everyone's opinions count. So I have no issue with that. I had a great time. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Well, the pleasure was ours. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jerry.
Thank you for my co-hosts. Thanks for everyone who
Thanks,
joined
guys.
us in the chat. Thank you for our super chatters. And until next time, take care of one another. Bye now.
Hi, everybody.
See you later, everybody.